Marques de Pombal, the man who rebuilt Portugal. It was the morning of November 1st, 1755. As church bells rang across Lisbon, disaster struck. A violent earthquake, one of the deadliest in recorded history, reduced the city to rubble. Tens of thousands perished. The world watched as Portugal stood on the brink of collapse. But from the ashes of catastrophe, one man would rise. His name was Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, better known as the Marques de Pombal. Chapter 1. Origins of a Reformer. To understand the man who would change Portugal forever, we must first go back to the dawn of the 18th century. Born in 1699 to a noble but modest family in Sour, Portugal, young Sebastião José was raised among the country's elite, yet he was never truly part of it. Unlike many aristocrats of his time, he did not inherit vast wealth or land. Instead, he carved his own path through intellect, determination, and a fierce belief in progress. He studied law at the University of Coimbra, but he was no ordinary student. While others followed tradition blindly, Sebastião questioned everything, especially the outdated, rigid structures of Portugal's governance. His political career began in diplomacy. First, as Portugal's ambassador to England, where he admired Britain's economic strength, and later to Austria, where he observed the efficiency of centralized government. These experiences would shape his future reforms. Chapter 2. Rise to Power. In 1750, King John V of Portugal passed away, marking the end of an era. His reign had been one of opulence, religious devotion, and vast overseas expansion. But his policies left the kingdom burdened by debt, a stagnant economy, and an inefficient administration. His son, Joseph I, inherited not just the throne, but a country in desperate need of reform. Unlike his father, Joseph I had little interest in the rituals of the church or the excesses of the aristocracy. He sought a stronger, more centralized government, one that could compete with the rising powers of Europe. But he needed a man who could challenge the status quo and bring his vision to life. That man was Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo. Though born into nobility, Carvalho e Melo was not part of Portugal's highest aristocratic circles. He was an outsider, ambitious, pragmatic, and unafraid to confront the powerful factions that controlled the country. His experience as an ambassador in England and Austria had exposed him to modern governance and economic systems, which he believed could be adapted to Portugal. He wasted no time in reshaping the kingdom. His initial reforms focused on strengthening Portugal's trade networks, improving state finances, and reducing the influence of corrupt noble families. He also began laying the groundwork for a more centralized administration, curbing the unchecked power of the aristocracy and clergy. Yet, despite his growing influence, Carvalho e Melo faced fierce opposition. The entrenched elite saw him as a dangerous force, a commoner rising too quickly in a world governed by lineage and privilege. But Joseph I trusted him completely, granting him unprecedented authority. Then, in just 5 years, his greatest test would come, the Great Lisbon Earthquake of 1755. Chapter 3. The Great Lisbon Earthquake. November 1st, 1755, All Saints' Day. Lisbon was one of the most prosperous cities in Europe, a hub of trade, culture, and power. But fate had other plans. An earthquake of an estimated magnitude of 8.5 to 9.0 struck Lisbon. The ground split open, entire neighborhoods vanished, and within minutes, towering waves from the Atlantic engulfed the city. Fires broke out, consuming whatever remained. Tens of thousands lay dead. The Portuguese monarchy was in shock. The church declared it divine punishment. But Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo saw it differently. While others mourned, he acted. He ordered immediate relief efforts, burial of the dead, and the rebuilding of Lisbon. His famous words echoed through history, "Bury the dead and feed the living." Under his leadership, Lisbon would rise again, stronger, more resilient, and more modern than ever before. Chapter 4. Reforms and Revolution. Carvalho e Melo didn't just rebuild Lisbon. He reimagined it. Where the medieval city had once been a maze of narrow streets and crumbling structures, he saw an opportunity for order and progress. Under his direction, Lisbon became a model of Enlightenment thinking, featuring wide boulevards, earthquake-resistant architecture, and a structured urban plan designed with both beauty and practicality in mind. But his vision extended far beyond architecture. To truly rebuild Portugal, Carvalho e Melo knew he had to dismantle the outdated systems that had kept the country stagnant for centuries. His reforms stretched into the economy, governance, and education, areas long controlled by the aristocracy and the church. Portugal's economy had been overly reliant on its colonies, particularly Brazil, where gold and diamonds had once flowed freely into the royal treasury. But Carvalho e Melo understood that a nation could not thrive on colonial wealth alone. He restructured trade policies, encouraged local industries, and curbed the influence of powerful merchant families who had monopolized commerce. He also created state-sponsored manufacturing initiatives to reduce dependency on foreign goods. Education, too, underwent a radical transformation. For centuries, learning had been dominated by religious teachings, with little emphasis on science or practical knowledge. Carvalho e Melo sought to change this. He introduced modern, secular education, replacing theological studies with subjects like mathematics, philosophy, and engineering. New schools were established, and scholarships were granted to promising students, ensuring that future generations would be equipped with the tools of progress. However, not everyone welcomed his reforms. Among his fiercest adversaries was the powerful Jesuit order, an institution that controlled much of Portugal's wealth, education, and colonial influence. The Jesuits had deep ties to the monarchy and the aristocracy, and they fiercely opposed Carvalho e Melo's attempts to curb their power. They saw him as a dangerous revolutionary, someone who sought to strip the church of its centuries-old authority. In 1759, Carvalho e Melo made his boldest move yet. Accusing the Jesuits of plotting against the monarchy, he ordered their expulsion from Portugal and its overseas territories. Their schools and missions were shut down, their properties confiscated, and their leaders exiled. It was a decisive and ruthless act, but one that reinforced his vision of a modern, centralized state free from the influence of the church. His campaign against corruption did not stop with the church. Carvalho e Melo turned his sights on the nobility, dismantling feudal privileges and holding aristocrats accountable for crimes they had once committed with impunity. He restructured the legal system, ensuring that the law applied equally to all, regardless of birthright. Those who opposed him were swiftly dealt with, exiled, imprisoned, or executed. The reaction was divided. To the old elite, Carvalho e Melo was a tyrant, a man who had seized absolute power and crushed opposition without mercy. But to the common people and reformers, he was a hero, a leader who had dragged Portugal out of feudal stagnation and into the modern world. His enemies called him a dictator. His supporters saw him as a visionary. But one thing was certain: by the 1760s, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo held absolute power over Portugal. Chapter 5: Fall from Power. For nearly 3 decades, Carvalho e Melo shaped Portugal's destiny. But all rulers have their time. In 1777, King Joseph died. His daughter, Queen Maria I, despised Pombal's methods. One of her first acts as queen was to dismiss him. He was exiled from Lisbon, stripped of power, and forced into isolation. He lived out his final years in near seclusion, dying in 1782. But history would not forget him. Chapter 6: Legacy. Today, his name is everywhere. Streets, schools, even a major square in Lisbon bear his name. Some see him as a visionary, others as a tyrant. But one fact remains: Portugal would not be the same without him. Marques de Pombal, the man who rebuilt Lisbon, the statesman who defied tradition, a reformer, a ruler, a legend. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts on Marques de Pombal's legacy.